Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best junglers for patch 6.22. I want to try out a little bit of a new format for this video for doing the honorable mentions. So usually I just state like a few honorable mentions at the end of the video, but instead of doing that, I feel like now I'm going to group the champions, like most of the jungle champions, into like a tier 2 and then a tier 3 grouping. So the champions on my top 5, the ones that I go into detail about, those are going to be like the god tier champions, the best champions that you can play this patch. And then in the tier 2, it's going to be like a little bit below the god tier, so not as strong but still pretty good. And then the tier 3 champions are usually going to be the ones that do take a lot more skill to play. They can still be strong, but you do need to know what you're doing on the champion. So if you guys do end up liking this new format for like the honorable mentions at the end, then be sure to let me know. But with that being said, let's get into the video. So first up on the list is going to be Kha'Zix. So Kha'Zix is doing pretty well this patch with the changes that he did get. He is definitely a lot more, I'd say, fun to play and a lot more versatile this patch because he does have a lot of options now with his evolutions. I really like that you can either go for like that ultimate upgrade at level 6 if you want to gank a lot in the early game. If you want to invade a lot though and you want to be in the enemy jungle, then you can go for that Q evolve. Your Q evolve just makes you a super strong duelist, and it also allows you to take dragon super fast. So if you do have your warrior finished, then definitely look to take dragon with Kha'Zix. You can probably take it even earlier than that if you do have your Q evolve. So if it is an infernal drake especially, then look to go for that early on and look to get those dragons as much as you can. He also was not a Strength of the Ages user, so that means that he didn't really get hurt too much, or he didn't get buffed, I guess, as well with the change to that mastery. You'll see that a lot of the junglers that were Strength of the Ages users but don't synergize with the new Courage of the Colossus, they're definitely not as good this patch, but because Kha'Zix, he does take Thunderlords, that didn't really affect him too much. Now as for when and when you should not pick Kha'Zix, look to pick him against a weaker early game jungler if you're confident that you can like try to shut them down and you can go for those invades in the early game. You are going to get outscaled late game by some of the other strong teamfight junglers like Amumu and Sejuani, but as long as you can invade them, you can make sure that you pressure a lot in the early game, then you can definitely snowball very hard with Kha'Zix. Now I would also try to avoid Rammus, Sejuani, and Vi. The reason for that is because if the game does reach that mid to late game, then Rammus can easily just taunt you in a team fight, Vi can easily ult you, and you can just get locked down very easily by those champions. Next up is going to be Amumu. So I feel like this patch, Amumu is very underrated. I don't think I've seen a single Amumu this patch being played, but I feel like he's just super strong with the new changes to the jungle. His clears are probably some of the best for any jungler this patch, and he can clear out the jungle probably like faster than any other jungler, maybe besides someone like Ivern, because he's got the AoE damage coming out from his W and his E as well, and that just means he can clear out the raptors super fast. Like the amount of time it takes for Amumu to clear raptors as opposed to someone like Nunu is probably a good like 5 to 10 seconds faster than what Nunu would clear it. So that just means he's going to be able to move around the map, get a lot more ganks off, and just be able to gank a lot quicker. He also is a good Courage of the Colossus user, so a lot of junglers this patch are really strong due to that new mastery, and Amumu, because of his ultimate and his Q, he can proc that really easily in a team fight. And if you do build tanky on Amumu, which I don't know why you wouldn't, then you are going to be getting a massive shield in those mid to late game team fights. He also does have a lot of very versatile build paths. You can go for like a hard carry AP damage Amumu, you can go for something like a Leandries and a Rylai's and just try to hard carry with your damage. If you need a tank though, you can just build full tank Amumu and you can still be very successful on him due to the crowd control that he does have with his ultimate. Now when should you not pick Amumu? So look to pick him if you are lacking engage. Also, he's a pretty good pick right now because we are seeing a lot of AD assassins being played with their reworks. So for example, if you got someone like a Zed mid and then a Jace top lane, Amumu is a great choice because number one, you'll be lacking that tank because Zed and Jace aren't tanks, and and number 2, you're going to be lacking that AP damage, so Mumu is overall just a great pick in those situations. Now I would try to avoid champions like Lee Sin, Evelynn, and Shaco. Eventually you will outscale them if the game does reach like the 30 to 35 minute point, but in the early game, if they can get ahead and they can get an invade on you, then they could be able to snowball the game to the point where it doesn't reach that late game where a Mumu does shine. Next up is going to be Sejuani. So I do rate Sejuani a little bit higher than a Mumu. They are very similar junglers and they do have very similar kits, but the reason I think Sejuani is just a little bit better than a Mumu is because her ultimate is a ranged crowd control ability, and you can use that to easily get picks in a mid to late game team fight, whereas with the Mumu, his ultimate, he needs to be right on top of the enemies to use it, so I feel like it's a little bit harder for you to pull off good ultimates with a Mumu if it does reach the very late game, whereas with Sejuani, if you do see the enemy caught out of position, you can just throw your ultimate and it's a lot easier for you to get a nice 3 or 4 man stun off with Sej than it is to get with a Mumu, at least in my opinion. She does do a lot of damage though for being pretty much a full tank champion. When I play her, I do go Leandri's, and then after that I go full tank, and you can still deal so much damage. She is also a great Courage of the Colossus user, which is why she did get quite a bit stronger this patch. So when should you not pick Sejuani? Pick her against those low mobility enemy team comps. It's going to be very easy for you to get a nice like 3 or 4 man ultimate off in a team fight if the enemy team doesn't have a lot of dashes or a lot of blinks to get away from your ultimate. Pick her if you do lack a tank, and then try to avoid Evelynn, Shaco, and Lee Sin. So the same goes for Sejuani that went for Mumu. If you're not confident in the early game that you can avoid those invades, then I would pick a different jungler, but as long as you do ward up and as long as you don't get invaded on, then you will outscale those junglers. Next up is going to be Vi. So right now, Vi is a very strong pick in the jungle. Her engage is probably the best for any jungler right now, or her engage is probably the most reliant, I should say, out of any jungler. You can easily pick out that enemy AD carry or mid laner in a team fight with your ultimate, and if you do get ahead with Vi, the amount of damage you can do is just absolutely crazy. If you do end up getting an ultimate off on the enemy squishy champion, then they're pretty much dead unless they do have flash to get away. So I feel like right now, if you're just looking for a good hard engaged jungler, then you should be picking Vi for sure. She also is a good Courage of the Colossus user, which pretty much every single jungler on my top 5 besides Kha'Zix does do really well with that new mastery. She also does have very versatile build paths, so like a Mumu, you can go like full tank, or I wouldn't recommend going full tank on Vi. You should at least go like 1 or 2 damage items, but after that you can go full tank and you can still do a lot of damage with her. Her level 6 ganks are probably some of the best and some of the easiest to pull off in the game for sure. You've got your ultimate, which is an easy lockdown on the target you're going for, and then as long as your laner does follow up, or if they've got a crowd control ability as well, then you should be able to get a nice kill at level 6 and just get a snowball going. So when should you not pick Vi? Look to pick her if your team is lacking engage, or if you're lacking that lockdown in a team fight. Also look to pick her if your team, or if the enemy team, doesn't have a lot of gap closers. It's going to be very easy for you to just pick them out in team fights with your ultimate if they don't have a dash or a blink to get away from you. And I would try to avoid Morgana or Janna. Those two champions can do pretty well against you, because if you try to dive in on the back line, Morgana can just black shield your ultimate and then Janna can knock you away. And lastly, to round out this top 5 for this patch is going to be Hecarim. So Hecarim, he's also a great Courage of the Colossus user because he can proc it super easily with his E and his ultimate. He's also a great early game jungler. Whenever I do play Hecarim, his level 3 ganks, I find that I'm always able to pick up a kill. Once you do, or if you do have your ghost up, which you obviously should at level 3, and then if you do have red buff, it's pretty much a free gank as long as the enemy is pushing up to around halfway. If you do end up playing it correctly and you get behind the enemy, you knock them into your team, and then you do just apply that red buff, then they shouldn't really be able to get away unless they do flash. His mid to late game team fighting ability is also really good. It's just super easy for him to pick out those low mobility AD carries that are being played right now. So if the enemy team does have someone like a Jhin or Misfortune or Jinx, then look to pick Hecarim for sure. Now he can also peel the assassins pretty well off of his AD carry, so if the enemy team does have quite a few assassins, then you can play Hecarim more as like a protect your AD carry type champion rather than a dive champion. If the enemies are just trying to dive on your AD carry every single fight, then you can just use your ultimate to keep your AD carry safe. Now as for when you should not pick Hecarim, he's a pretty good pick this patch in my opinion, one of the best junglers for sure, so if he is not banned then look to pick him up, but I would try to avoid heavy disengage, so Janna and Morgana, they can do pretty well against Hecarim, so if those champions are picked then I wouldn't pick him in that situation unless you're really confident on your Hecarim. Alright, so moving on to the new honorable mentions now, I'm going to be grouping a few champions here into a tier 2 and then into a tier 3. So first off, let's take a look at the tier 2 junglers for this patch. So in this tier is going to be Nunu, Evelynn, Ivern, Zac, Graves, Skarner, and Rammus. So these junglers are all really strong, but the reason to why they're not on my top 5, I'll go over the reason for like a few of the champions. So for Nunu, he did kind of get hurt a little bit this patch because it's going to be a lot harder for him to clear out the new jungle, with the Raptors being like more of them now, and then with the Krugs having like 10 Krugs, it's going to be a lot harder for him to clear effectively because he is only single target damage, so that is one of the main reasons to why Nunu did drop off of the top 5. Now as for Ivern, I think that Ivern, he could have been on the top 5 this patch. He's actually got, I think, the highest win rate for any jungler right now, according to a few stat sites. I'm not completely sure if he is like actually the best jungler right now or one of the best junglers, but the Iverns that I've seen, they're just super annoying to deal with. I feel like Daisy is just super strong in, especially like in team fights, it's just so hard to deal with Ivern's ultimate, and then the fact that he does have like just really good utility in his kit with his E and his Q makes him a pretty good jungler right now, and he can also like one-shot the Raptors, and he can also like one-shot any camp in the game, so that also makes him a great pick right now in my opinion. Alright, so if we take a look at the tier 3 junglers now, so these are the junglers that I think are strong, but they're only strong if you've practiced them and if you know what you're doing on them. So these champions are going to be Shaco, Twitch, Lee Sin, Elise, and Rengar. So let's talk about Rengar here. I feel like Rengar is kind of hit or miss right now. I've seen a lot of like really good Rengars, but then I've also seen a lot of really crappy Rengars that are pretty useless. Some people are saying that he's like extremely broken, and then you've got other people saying that he's like super weak. I was reading on Twitter like a few days ago, or maybe it was today, I saw that I Will Dominate said that Rengar just feels super weak and he's not a very strong champion. So right now I'm not completely sure as to how good this jungler is, but he is definitely a pretty good pick, I think, if you do know how to play him correctly. Now as for Shaco, I feel like Shaco, his early game did get quite a bit of a nerf, so you do have to be a lot more unique with the way you gank with him in the early game if you want to be successful. So I think because of that, he is a little bit harder to play now, and he's a little bit harder to be successful on. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below if you do like this new style of the honorable mentions, like doing tier 2 and tier 3 champions. I will do this for the other roles as well if you guys do like this new style. I'm not going to talk about every single jungler though, or every single champion in the tier 2 and in the tier 3 category, because I feel like if I do that and if I explain like why they're not on the top 5 or why they're not a little bit higher, then the video would last like 20 or 30 minutes, and I don't think that a lot of people would want to watch a 20 or 30 minute video. So that is going to be all though, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.